Thanks, Mike. Good to see you. The pregame show has officially become the part of the main show. So thanks a lot for being here.
Thanks
Mike
for
apologizes. He had a little bit of a camel incident this morning.
I had an actual stuck behind camels on their way into the Fallon show on the way.
Only in New York City, right? Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being here. Anyone who doesn't know Mike, he has a long history in esports. Back in 2002, you helped found Major League Gaming. You've been heavily involved as recently as a few years ago with Activision Blizzard and helped getting them off the ground. I'm going to come next to you. I feel like I'm so far away from you right now. So first off, I guess take us real quick. We've only got about maybe 10 or 15 minutes with you here. You've seen a lot of evolution throughout the history of this industry, and to help people kind of put a timeline on it, when we look back, maybe a few years down the line, when you reflect on 2018, what do you think will be the things that will be noted in the history of esports? What notable things occurred in 2018 that you think helped push the industry forward?
Yeah, I think the biggest kind of structural change in the business that's accelerating almost every aspect of it is just the organization, sort of the collapsing of the value chain. So what the first decade and a half of esports was really sort of Wild West, in that the game publishers and rights holders were not in control of the leagues. The teams were separate from the leagues. Everything was sort of very organic and community driven. And in 2016, while I was at Activision Blizzard, we announced the Overwatch League, which was the first city-based franchise system. So very similar to the NFL or NBA kind of a structure. But it created an opportunity for lots of new investment, lots of new platforms, and a more stable ecosystem. And so most of the news that you've seen in the past 12 to 18 months about esports has been driven by that.
Okay. So your division now, Electronic Sports Group, we see that. What are you guys involved in? What are you guys doing? How are you a part of the ecosystem now?
Yeah, so I left Activision Blizzard a few months ago after helping to create and launch the Overwatch League and all their other esports properties. ESG, we're basically a collection of some senior people from the traditional sports media and esports world. And we're kind of helping companies, technology companies, large private equity funds, advertising agencies, and brands. Essentially, the way I describe it is we want to help big, more traditional companies have a successful first step into esports. Okay. Many take a wrong step, whether it's offending consumers by being inauthentic, or just getting the tech wrong, or overbuilding. There's a bunch of things like that. So we're kind of trying to help that transition from the traditional world into esports world be successful.
Okay. So obviously we see the consumption numbers that are just through the roof on platforms like Twitch. Even if you're watching through your gaming system like on a PlayStation, of course there's YouTube as well. When it's still having a hard time obviously converting over into traditional quote unquote cable television, broadcast television, whatever may that be. Will that change? Can that change? Is that a matter of just telling the stories of the games and the athletes better, or is it just never going to happen on TV?
No, I think so. You're seeing parts of it. So the Overwatch League first inaugural World Championship was in August at the Barclays Center here in New York, and one of the games, the Saturday night kind of 2-hour block, was broadcast live on ESPN. So it was one of the first kind of big traditional sports network live television broadcasts. It was also simulcast on Twitch and a variety of Asian Twitch competitors kind of in China. I think part of the issue is the core audience of esports is generally under 30, and almost no people under 30 have cable TV anymore. Right. So they just aren't able to watch through that platform. But the other challenge is, and this is not for big championship events, but the other challenge is sort of technical. Like the esports world is used to live streaming, not television quality production throughout the whole sort of production chain.
And so we had our inaugural esports production forum out in Los Angeles last month, and we leaned a lot into the conversations of, hey, how's technology making these games even more entertaining to watch than maybe they were? There were times when, you were watching a college basketball game and it might have just been one camera locked off on the court. The early days of esports is probably that. You're just watching someone with them in their little tiny corner and just watching them play the game. In what ways have you seen the industry advance in this regard? Like actually do things in the game to make people at home understand what the goal is, who's succeeding and achieving the goal, who's close to winning. Have you seen anyone do anything that's really making the storytelling process of these games? And I know there's all different kinds of games, but has anything been done to make the storytelling process better, you think?
The one thing I can tell you is in all video game development studios now, there's a word being kicked around for the past maybe 2 years that never occurred before, which is watchability. When people were designing games, they never thought about, can we make it better so it's more fun to watch somebody play this game? It was just, what are the game mechanics? What's the player's experience? So now there's a lot of thought put into not just the gameplay when you're designing the game, but somebody watching somebody play the game. That's a big deal. I think the other aspect of it is, for a game like League of Legends, which is sort of the biggest esports game out there, it's been out for a long time. It has, I think, 70, 80 million people a month play the game. Hundreds of millions watch it. It's a top-down kind of overview, so you're sort of looking at the whole map of all the action that's going on. That's just the way the game's played. There's other games that are first-person perspectives, games like Overwatch, and so the challenge there is you have 12 players in the game at the same time trying to follow all the action from each of their perspectives, and then virtual cameras. So you're not just talking about, like, there's actual physical cameras that with people operating them, looking at the real people on stage. And then you have a bunch of people who have to not only be good camera people, but very good at the game because they have to actually be in the game and virtually moving around a camera. So there's just a ton of new, kind of very different and unique challenges to this from a technical point of view.
Yeah, I remember we had Frank Laspina from Blizzard who was speaking, and he really put it in perspective when he was saying, it's like, look, if this were a physical, real life sport, you've got athletes, talking about the characters in the game, you've got athletes with supernatural abilities competing on a playing surface that's miles by miles wide, trying to accomplish different things based off the maps. It's like, no wonder this is a difficult thing to get across for maybe even someone who plays the game on a regular basis. So when you hear, and I mean, people do, we deal with this in quote-unquote traditional sports, and that's take a shot every time we say that during an esports conversation. In traditional sports, I mean, you hear even, NBC will say this about the NHL. Hey, we're trying to bring in the casual audiences on a Sunday, with a game in the afternoon. Is that something that you feel that esports needs to do? Is it not necessary? Do you think should there be versions of a broadcast where, there's just less graphics on the screen and it's more clear what the quote-unquote score is? Is that a noble effort to try to do that, or is it kind of a lost cause, do you think?
I think it's very difficult to do that without alienating the core audience, right? That would be like, watching an NFL game and you only see the quarterback.
And you don't know what down it is.
You don't know what any of the rules are or anything like that. So I think part of it is, it's in the actual game development, slowing down the pace of games a little bit, making the broadcast tools a little bit better. But it's also the traditional part, and again, over the past few years, more and more people from the traditional sports media world have come into the esports space as executives on bigger companies and things like that. And so they're bringing some of those learnings in. But a lot of it is just telling the storylines. It's not, it's still entertainment, right? Even though it's sports. So we have to cover the actual sport, but you have to create personalities and create narratives and storylines. And, I think that's the part that attaches people to it. It's going to be tough, just like it would be tough to, explain the rules of NFL football to people in 60 seconds who weren't aware of them. It's always going to be tough to kind of get people into new sports, and clearly games that are just sort of easier to watch have an advantage. But I don't know that you can kind of get all the way there. It's going to be a mix.
So what are those esports that you feel have that kind of lead as like, all right, this is an easy story to consume as someone actively? Which esports are?
Well, I think any game with a sort of top-down primary point of view, meaning you're seeing like sort of all the characters and all the action happen at once, and that's the natural way to watch the game, has a distinct advantage because it's significantly easier to broadcast all the action and the commentators can sort of tell the story of what's going on. Whereas games like first-person shooters, you really have 10 to 12 different individual points of view, and you have to try to weave a story together through all of that with the capability to pull back and see most of the action of what's going on. But it's sort of like a basketball game. You can pull back and see the whole court in transition parts of the game, but you really got to get up close and see the action. And part of it is just explaining to a wider audience exactly what's going on.
Okay. How do you feel about sports as esports, things like the NBA 2K League or big-time FIFA competitions that go on? It's a different audience that I think gets overlooked sometimes, where it's like people who are quote unquote, hardcore esports people who are playing things like Hearthstone or League of Legends. They're mostly not traditional stick and ball sports fans. They play video games. That's what they like to do. Are you bullish on those kinds of things like the NBA 2K League and EMLS and groups like that? Do you think there's room for success there?
I think they can be successful in the context of what they're supposed to be, right? They're supposed to engage, the NBA 2K League, I think the primary mission is to engage a younger audience with basketball. It's not really to grow sort of esports. And if you think of esports, don't think of esports as like basketball, football, hockey, esports. Think of it as traditional sports and then a whole new layer of its own basketball, football, baseball.
There's fighting games, first-person shooters, and all that different kind of stuff. Okay, so as we've got a couple minutes left here. As you kind of look ahead to 2019, is there anything that you've kind of got your eye on as an industry trend that you feel could be a potential breakthrough for this space? I don't know. What do you kind of keeping your eyes on?
Yeah, I think there's a few big trends. I think one is you'll see more linear television distribution of esports and bigger kind of event-based broadcasts. I think one of the interesting things is going to be because this sport has been broadcast digitally for so long and the games are universal globally, the fan base really is global. It starts as a global fan base and then it sort of regionalizes as the content gets produced or the leagues are developed. So I think the other thing that you'll start to see is big American sports media companies look at can they extend their distribution globally with this new type of content too through their digital platforms. So I think that'll be really interesting. I think the next big wave you'll start to see is in the past 18 months we saw a lot, close to I think $500 million in new capital come into finance teams and the development of these leagues. I think the next wave that you'll start to see are big consumer brands kind of coming in and figuring out how to embrace the sport. And with the size audience that it has and given it really kind of fills in the gap that traditional broadcasters are missing in the under 30 audience, you can really easily find where all those under 30s are. They're watching esports on Twitch or YouTube. So being able to kind of attach bigger brands and bigger experience to those, I think will be the next big wave.
All right, so send the folks in the audience here away with maybe a little bit of advice. We've got, many people who run operations, some of which are at traditional broadcast companies, some of which, Turner Sports has got E-League, NBA has dipped their toe in the water a little bit with things like Rocket League. If someone's at a network that maybe hasn't done any of this yet, what's a piece of advice you might give them as they kind of dive into the deep end of the pool, if you will?
I would, first, you should hire my new firm, but
that's part one. Yeah.
But no, I would really spend a lot of time just watching the content that's out there because I think there's a lot of people that come from the traditional media world that try to transfer over to esports, kind of come in and say, oh, you guys, you just have to use the same tools and techniques and things like that we've been doing for years that are well worn. I think about half the time that's right. But half the time, you've kind of missed something big. And the viewing experience for most fans of esports is super interactive. It's not a linear, passive experience. Knowing how to engage, much more coordination, for instance, between on-air talent and what's happening on the screen and what's happening on social media and in live chats and things like that. So you've got to think in less sort of like passive, sit-back, linear storytelling mode and more about how am I in real time continuing to engage an audience through all of the different elements of this, whether it's the on-air talent, what's happening in the game, the broadcast tools that you've got, the social media tools that you got. So it's a bigger, richer experience, and I don't think it's really difficult to explain. I think you got to just watch a bunch of it. Like you would if I sent you to go broadcast cricket, you'd have to watch a lot of cricket before you
I would, yeah. So you're saying we have to read the comments is what you're saying?
Yeah, read the comments.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, Mike. We really appreciate you fighting your way through the city camel traffic, and thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you.